Hello, my name is Dennis Shirley. I am a research professor at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. And I'm also a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin. I'm here to talk about my new book, The Age of Identity. Who do we think our kids are and how can we help them belong? Co-authored with Andy Hargraves. Now, the first thing you might think about is how does somebody come to write a book about identity, and in particular, how do two old straight white men come to write a book about identity in the current age? There's a little story behind that, and the story, I think, begins with the responsibility of researchers to get out into schools and to discover what's going on in those schools with fresh eyes. So in the past few years, Andy and I have written 3 books, actually. We studied a network called the Northwest Rural Innovation and Student Engagement Network, and out of that, we produced a book, 5 Paths of Student Engagement. Then we studied school districts, 10 school districts in Ontario, Canada. All of them were addressing student well-being as part of a new governmental mandate at the time of our investigation. So we wrote a book called Well-Being in Schools, based on our observations and analysis of what was happening with that agenda. Our book on the age of identity really came out of the work on well-being in schools because so many educators told us that something was getting in the way of their students' well-being if we didn't address aspects of their identity that were somehow stigmatized, oppressed, or marginalized in schools. So what does that mean in Canada? It means a lot of educators told us about their strategies to improve the teaching, the curriculum, and the assessment of Indigenous students. That's a large population in Canada. They also told us about their efforts to try and improve the learning of students who had learning disabilities, students who are LGBTQ. In Ontario, there's a French language minority that is trying to absorb Francophone or French-speaking students from all over the world into their schools. There's Old Order Mennonite schools, what we might know as Anabaptist students here in the U.S. So there's all these different identities that are out there in our schools. What should educators do with all of these identities? Well, our book is chock full of descriptions of things that educators are doing. We provide descriptions of educators rethinking their curriculum so that if a student expresses interest in hockey, the curriculum's rebuilt around that. If students are interested in using new technologies to enhance their learning, then we work with that. And the real fine point that we're trying to investigate is what do these different identities have to offer us in our schools? So when you think of your own identity, you might think, oh, race, gender, class, nationality, perhaps. But you probably have many more identities than that. Maybe you follow a sports team. Maybe you're a Swiftie. Maybe you love Bob Dylan. Maybe there's lots of different ways that you express your personality. So if you're interested in this topic and exploring it, our book tries to go into this both with real nitty-gritty practical details, but also with some theory building. For just one example of that, there's a lot of discussion about intersectionality. This is a term that originated by Kimberly Crenshaw, and actually a legal scholar, who tried to discern the ways in which being a black woman and poor wasn't 3 separate identities, it was one of compounded forms of impression. So let's call that critical intersectionality. But there's also ways that people could be very positive about their diverse identities. If we think of the Canadian hip-hop artist Drake, he's proud of being black, he's proud of being Jewish, he's proud of being Canadian, he's proud of lots of different parts of his identity. So we have critical intersectionality, and then we have celebratory intersectionality. But we don't tend to talk a whole lot about conflicting intersectionality, which is when there are different parts of my identity that are oppressed in some ways, but oppressing in others. That's a critical terrain that I think will be the next horizon for how we need to be thinking about identity in schools. So if you're interested in identities, and I think we all are, I encourage you to explore your own identity, your personal identity, your professional identity, your generational identity, all these different facets of your identity. And if you want to have interesting conversations with random strangers, taxi cab drivers, waiters, people you meet at an airport, people that you meet while out for a walk in your neighborhood, ask them to engage with you in discussions around identities. Because, like it or not, we are living in an age of identity, and it's up to us to try and make the most of it, its positive aspects, and to try and control those parts that could get in the way of our students' learning. Thank you.